Yeah, thank you, Grace. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's now watching the live stream on YouTube or via Tencent meeting in China. Welcome to the education panel of the 2021 Berkeley China Summit. My name is Roger Ying. I'm the founder of Excel Orange Education and Technology Group, and it is my great honor to be the moderator today. So this 15 minutes panel will be divided into three main parts. First, we'll have a recap of the challenges we have faced during the pandemic. What are some of the post-pandemic changes for students, educators, and industry professionals? We'll also discuss some of the latest innovations and technology applications in the education industry that has been used in a global scale amid the pandemic. Second, we'll be discussing the growing trend and opportunities in the future of education, especially for the international student community, which is a heated topic that has concerned many of our international students. Lastly, we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. We'd love to hear from you. Please do not hesitate to raise your questions or concerns. If you are on YouTube, you can post your questions in the chat box. And if you are using the Tencent meeting, you can also post your questions in a webinar. And we'll have our staff in the room to collect your questions at the end. So along with me, we have some of the greatest minds in academia and industry. Joining us first, Ms. Shuo Chen is a general partner at IOVC, and she is also a faculty at UC Berkeley and Singularity University. In her venture role, she focuses on early stage venture investment in Silicon Valley with a focus on future of work and enterprise sales. Shuo is appointed by California Governor Gavin Newsom as the first Asian American commissioner to serve as one of 13 voting members on California's Mental Health Commission. Thank you so much for being here, Shuo.
Thanks so much for organizing.
Our second panelist is Dr. Linda Chrisman, Executive Director and Assistant Dean of the Master of Financial Engineering program at the UC Berkeley School of Business. Linda was the first director ever to develop a pre-programmed set of courses, including data science and machine learning, tailored to each admitted student as early as 2012. Under her leadership, the Berkeley MFE program ranked the #1 by TFE Times 6 years in a row. Welcome, Linda, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our next panelist is Mr. Paulo Livas, CEO and founder of Levolumne, an edtech company whose mission is to digitally transform the world's best universities. Paulo's team enables leading universities to improve education standards on a global scale. By providing innovation and the latest technology, they overcome geographic and language barriers so that instructors can easily communicate with professionals all around the world. Welcome, Paulo, and thank you for your time joining us 3 a.m. in Madrid, Spain.
No, thank you, my pleasure.
Yeah, our panelist is Mr. Rudy Rubio. Rudy is currently the Senior Director of Higher Education Program Operations at Minerva Project, working closely with Minerva's partners to set up, launch, and grow joint programs. Prior to joining Minerva, he managed the US partnerships team at Coursera. Welcome, Rudy, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So before we dive into the first part regarding the challenges and recent edtech innovations, we have a special guest today who is also answering some of these questions. Dr. John Hennessy, who is the current chairman of Google's parent company, Alphabet Inc., and the 10th president of Stanford University. Dr. Hennessy is a world-renowned computer scientist and 2017 Turing Award winner. He was called the godfather of Silicon Valley, and his work, along with David Patterson, who is also a speaker in 2019 Berkeley China Summit, is now used in 99% of the new computer chips. Let's see what he got for us.
Hello, my name is John Hennessy, and I'm delighted to have this chance to share a few thoughts with the attendees at the Berkeley China Summit in 2021. We've lived through a very difficult time during the pandemic. It's certainly affected our universities and our education system dramatically. On the plus side, we were able to make the most of technology, to use tools like Zoom or Google Meet or Microsoft Teams to bring people together and to interact with our students. On the negative side, I think we would all say that it wasn't the same as having the students in person. And now we can really see, having them back on campus, what a difference it's made, particularly for students to interact with other students, something that seems so artificial in the Zoom world. Lots of things did work well. Breakout rooms gave us a way to create discussions in an artificial environment, but even they weren't perfect. So I think we've learned and accelerated some of our technologies through the pandemic. I think we'll redeploy those. I think the real question is, what do we need to do differently? I think we all have known for a while and realized that personal interaction is critical. If we use technology purely to deliver talking heads to students or faculty members sketching on PowerPoint or bulletin boards, that's not enough to engage students, to make them feel like they're active learners, to support those students that may be struggling in a particular course. So one of the things I'm most excited about is ways in which we can push that technology forward. Maybe perhaps building on some of the things that worked during the pandemic. One of the things that I did see work reasonably well was to build online tutoring systems where Stanford undergrads or Berkeley undergrads or perhaps even high school students would help other students who were struggling with the material. And I think we can use technology to facilitate that so that people don't have to meet in person, which of course has a lot more overhead associated with it, and yet can match up perhaps tutor and student needing tutoring. I'm excited about some of these directions as ways to go. I'm equally excited about the next generation of ed tech and how it may build on machine learning as a key tool. One of the other hard pieces of online education, besides this personal interaction piece, is how we can give back intelligent, thoughtful feedback to students. And some of our faculty members, Chris Peach and others at Stanford, are working on systems using machine learning to give feedback that is as good as they would get from a teaching or course assistant. I'm very hopeful about this technology, and I believe it could give us a way to scale up without lowering the quality of the instruction and education and feedback. That's the key. It's easy to scale up online lectures. It's really hard to scale up personal feedback, encouragement, and direction. And I think that's one of the things I'm excited about what we might be able to do with ML, not completely removing teaching assistants or course assistants, but amplifying them in the same way that online tools can amplify the reach of an instructor.
It's a great honor to have Dr. Hennessy share his thoughts and participating in our panel. Dr. Hennessy mentioned lots of changes in the traditional setting. I'd like to start with this first part of the story. I want to first turn the mic to Linda and Shuo. So both of you are very experienced in the traditional education setting at UC Berkeley, specifically teaching courses, engaging with students, including lots of international students. And Linda, could you please share with us what are some of the challenges that you have seen during the pandemic, and what do we learn from that? I know there are lots of international students in our MFE program at Berkeley House, and how are they being impacted?
So, well, first of all, I will say that when the sheltering started in California, it was March 16 or March 17, 2020. The MFE program runs from March to March. So I had literally international students who had arrived a month before and who went fully on Zoom. We were ready to go. We were the first actually program at the high school to be ready to go fully on Zoom from day one until graduation. I think, what we did was to maintain communication with our students. I can say that I kept on saying to myself, I'm glad that my kids were older because I kept the communication going almost at all times. I ate with the students. It was important to maintain that. But I will say this, and that's the last thing that I'll say, is that our students enjoyed the coursework and the courses via Zoom. They found them to be very efficient, but they did get together and helped each other. And I think this is why we took an entire class very successfully to graduation. and they saw the school, the high school, on the day of graduation, in fact. They came back to campus to watch it. So, that, that's what we did.
Thank you so much, Lina, for sharing. And we know some of the students have kind of deferred admission before due to travel restrictions, and some others may need to take courses at midnight. How are we kind of addressing those?
Nobody deferred. We do not actually allow to defer. We knew that we allowed some students, and the Berkeley International Office also allowed some students to come in late. So they left, went to another country and arrived. There was only one student that we allowed to complete the entire program in China, but he wanted to do that, but all of our students had arrived a month before. So they were all here, and there were no issues with placement in terms of jobs. In fact, our placement literally was 98% placement a month after graduation.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, we on the MFE program at Berkeley is really, really good. And I think your information is kind of a reassurance for many of the international students, especially in China. So certainly the pandemic changes lots of our traditional education activities. I'd like to turn to Shuo. You're also a faculty at Berkeley, and we know you serve as a voting member in the Mental Health Commission. So combining these experiences, do you see any student behavior change in and out of the classroom, probably the Zoom classroom? What are the main challenges that you have seen during this pandemic?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a little bit more context on my background as well. I actually started my career as an ed tech education combined with technology from a few different perspectives. And then, of course, later on in my career, I was working in investment banking at Goldman Sachs, covering all these technology companies. Unfortunately, I had the opportunity to bring a number of education companies public. And of course, now in my investing and teaching roles, get to continue to see things. I definitely think that COVID has accelerated change. I wouldn't necessarily say that COVID has completely changed ways from what we've seen before, but it certainly has helped move things along. So the course that I'm teaching this semester, as Linda likely already knows, I'm under the Faculty of Engineering. And what's really interesting is that this is actually the first ed tech course that we're offering that covers everything from early childhood education, K-12, and tertiary, all the way up to upskilling and future of work. And it's really exciting because this is the very first time that we're seeing this conversation take place, not just limited to future of education as limited to education, but really seeing the blurring lines between future of education and future of work. Because it used to be that we were in a capacity as a student, and that was that. And then of course we transitioned to the role of a professional, and that was that. But I would definitely say that in increasing trends, where in class full time, but because of the virtual of a lot of classes, making the trend where growth at Facebook, or rather Meta, almost every was developing in their respective roles as professionals that capacity. Done work in the mental health.
Well, we apologize for some technical issue. It seems that we have some internet connection issue with Shuo, and it certainly shows that we definitely have a lot of work to do in the future of education to boosting our connectivity and all of that. So and continue to pursuing education technology and innovations. So I will get back to you, Shuo, in just one moment. So shall we now continue with Rudy? So I think next question is for Rudy and Paulo. You are both from a non-traditional university setting where Minerva is a very unique university. And Paulo, you try to digitally transform the traditional universities and offer it to students around the globe. So let's start with Rudy. Many global audience may not be very clear about Minerva. Could you please briefly introduce what are the main differences between Minerva and, say, Berkeley? And are you also seeing the same challenges that Linda and Shaw is previously seeing?
Yes. So just to clarify one thing, I think you're referencing Minerva University, and there's a difference between Minerva University and Minerva Project. So I'll start with Minerva University, which I think more people may be familiar with. Essentially, our founder, Ben Nelson, and a team of academics and staff rebuilt the higher education experience from the ground up. I'm thinking about preparing students for and arming them with skills that would make them future ready. So thinking about effective communication, effective collaboration, critical thinking and creative thinking, and doing it all through a proprietary online platform that we call Forum. And so embedded throughout all of our curriculum and pedagogy is a focus on fully active learning. So when we think about what traditional classrooms require just in terms of students either sitting in rows or sitting at desks and often listening to a faculty member, and in some cases, engaging with fully active learning, whether it's a discussion, whether it's role play or some other thing, there are limitations to the physical space that we wanted to move past. And so what we do with the online platform, just a step up from Zoom, is make sure that technology is not a hindrance, but it actually propels the students' learning forward by allowing for the types of activities I just described really in the blink of an eye. Our students live in 7 different cities around the world. And even though they're distributed globally, they actually do live together in a dorm and take all of their classes through Forum, but experience the city through, through the eyes of locals and experts that are in the city who want to meet the students. So, I mean, I could run down a list of the differences between what Minerva does and what we offer to partners and what traditional universities offer, but that gives you just a taste of kind of what Minerva students experience versus what a Berkeley student might.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing the overview of Minerva. I think many of our audience must be very interested, and you can definitely search more on that. So finally on this, I'd like to ask Pablo, what are some of the challenges you and your team is facing, and what are some of the solutions that you have came out?
Well, the important thing is that Levolumne, when we started online learning, was back in 2014, so before the pandemic world. And that gave us a tremendous advantage in terms of that we were extremely ready to face something like lockdown as we suffered during March 2020. And the thing is that because we are only focusing on executive education, that also helped us because we had the professionals already now, so they were used to this environment, very different from undergrad or other type of courses. So we were ready there. And the thing is that we have all the capabilities and the capacity for absorbing the demand, the increase on the demand of these professionals. Just to let you know that we operate in 6 different languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, and Chinese. So we had students from all around the world, and the challenges, they were not challenges because we were already there. So nothing new, but a lot of them together, as usual. So the business continued as usual. And the real challenge today is how we can connect with each other and how can we engage in a similar way as in person, considering that, of course, we are virtual and the in-person world is physical. So how will we combine the best of both worlds now that we were not able to travel or to be together? And that's something that we are solving with a lot of different technologies that we will talk through the presentation today.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And before I ask you the follow-up question, let me try again with Shaw. So just really quickly, so if you don't mind sharing, how are we trying to give kind of quality feedback that Dr. Hennessy is mentioning in the clip? How are we giving those quality feedback during the online kind of education time?
Yeah, thanks so much for coming back. I didn't even realize that my internet was cutting out. Can you hear me okay now?
Very good, thank you.
Amazing. This is great to know. Well, first of all, the most important piece of giving feedback is having internet access and actually being able to talk to people. But I've realized that during Zoom era, if you're doing anything hybrid or completely virtually, it is extremely important to build personal relationships with all of your students. So at least what I've been doing in class, even for virtual sessions, is that I always save time to get to know each of my teams, project teams within the class individually. And I know when the pandemic first hit, all of the faculty, what they tried to do was to meet one-on-one with all the students individually. And that helps build an initial relationship of trust so that later in the semester, it's possible to actually be able to share that piece of feedback. Because honestly, relationship building directly with students, especially between educator to student, it is completely different if you just don't have that in-person interaction. Once they've seen you in person, that level of default trust that is built is very different than if you've never met in person before. So I've realized the importance of that piece for sure. And then I think where my internet was cutting out earlier was when I started to talk about the importance of mental health. As humans, we are very much social animals, and we're not really built to be always alone, isolated, staring at a screen. And so it's been really important to think about how to adopt healthier practices throughout our day-to-day, not just learning schedules and working schedules, but everything else. And so particularly in terms of thinking through how students can start to navigate some of this, I do think it's important that they save time thinking through the basics of going outside, getting some sun, taking a walk, getting some fresh air, not staring at screens 24/7. It's a wonderful place to start. And then on top of that, figuring out opportunities for building genuine human connection outside of these kind of mini little virtual Zoom boxes. So hopefully that answered the missing part of the previous question as well.
Yeah, that answered it definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. And we certainly hope more students can be, students can be less stressful and use more resources around them to tackle all of these questions. So Paulo, turn to you really quickly. Have you seen you mentioned the online education and the program you have run in different languages. Have you seen more students coming to you pursuing different types of online education? And what is the biggest need or things can be improved that you think going forward?
So do I have seen more increase on professionals? Absolutely, because at the end we are serving that community that was not able to travel. So we are seeing an expansion on online learning or executive education online learning, which is the space where we work. So yes, definitely, absolutely. And then what are the risks or the challenges that we do have is, I think that employability. With online learning, with executive education online learning, what we could do is we can help to reduce the gap of professionals who are working professionals that they have been 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, it doesn't matter, on the space, but they need for whatever reason, they need more capabilities in order to perform better within their companies. No? So I think that executive education online, they will bring up, or universities will try to bring up those capabilities up to speed in terms of we can teach machine learning, we can teach data, we can teach a lot of the most important trends or technology trends that they're out there. And that's a very good way of retraining a massive population of professionals that we need to be trained. So I think that's a very good way of serving the community or the professionals in order to help them and just reset some of their skills and upgrade them. So that's the most important thing that we could do through online learning.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I think what Paulo said is a great transition for us to move into the second topics, which is a growing trend and opportunities in the future of education. So let me turn the mic to Linda. I know you serve also as a board member and advisor in many startups. I know your expertise in fintech, but are there any exciting innovation experiment going on in our MFE classroom or Berkeley as a whole? What do you hope to see?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of innovation at the Haas School of Business. Personally, the MFE hasn't taken advantage of it yet, but there are virtual classrooms now. So there was the use of Barco, a virtual classroom, 4 students around a monitor. This was used, I think, very quickly. To go back to what Shuo said, the relationship with the students is very important. And so I think students actually will want this interaction with the faculty and the administrators as well. But I think that post-pandemic, or now we're not post-pandemic really yet, but I think the students are going to demand more online learning and a combination of that. Our students are okay actually with even Zoom classrooms, but they want time with the professors and ask questions. And it might be that we are going to enter finally a very efficient educational system where, it's forcing also the professors to be very efficient in their delivery of the courses. And I found that our students are more demanding, rightfully so, by the way. At the same time, we've seen MBA students that has suffer a little bit, and of course, from not being in touch with their classmates more often. But with us, our students, I have to say also, got together and in a safe manner, ended up living together, 5, 6 of them. It did produce, by the way, one marriage. That's a different story. But I think what's important is that students are becoming more demanding, forcing faculty to be more efficient in their course delivery. Hence, our students are going to learn a lot more, I believe. I'm very positive on this, but you have to have half and half. You cannot have just delivery online and no interaction. Mental health, very important. During the pandemic, I spent a lot of time knowing my students, and I'm very close to my students and my alumni. I believe that I got much closer to my students during the pandemic because, of course, I was worried about their mental health. We are talking about students who came from families, very close families. Boom, they arrive at Berkeley, and there's nobody to welcome them at the Haas School of Business, right? Because we are in the pandemic sheltering. So very important. If we do all of this, we pay attention to all of this things in here in mental health and efficiency, I think we're going to have a very efficient educational system.
Definitely, I think the personal interaction is still a very important aspect in our education. So let me turn the mic to Rudy. I know Minerva is very creative in your curriculum that you just mentioned and has many technologies involved as well. So where do we see the future of Minerva is going? And what are some of the innovations that you hope to see in the future?
Sure, it's a good question because you had asked earlier what types of things had Minerva been seeing and were they similar to what other ed tech companies are seeing or traditional universities? And I think the answer to that is a resounding yes. The pandemic has serviced some challenges that have affected everybody. And I think, this is just from an inside perspective, but of course, Minerva, I think, has weathered some of those challenges more easily, just given that our students were used to an online platform. They were used to traveling, going back to a safe place. And then, we had teams that were dedicated to providing student experience even off of campus. And so we were able to replicate the type of experience we wanted to provide to students at a high level, even during the pandemic. Now, that being said, there are still things that we were not able to replicate as easily as we would have wanted, right? So, I think that I see some questions in the chat here about replacing traditional higher education, and I'm happy to talk about that. But one of the things that we have seen is that students appreciate and crave some interaction, some social experience. And so, distributing students outside of the cities that were in our global rotation back to their hometowns, we had to think really deeply about what student experience then meant in the online space, what it meant for them to maintain interaction such that they were getting feedback from their faculty, like some of the other panelists have talked about, and to do so consistently and effectively while respecting the schedules of both the students and the instructors. So in terms of innovation, I think this is something that we've been talking about here, but really thinking about where the threshold is for making sure that we can continue to provide feedback to a global cohort of students, that we're doing so with diversity in mind. It's going without being said, but a lot of the students that we cater to at most of the institutions, even on this call, are from a higher SES background. And so how do we make sure that we're reaching students and audiences who may not have access to some of the technologies or some of the opportunities that our current audiences have access to? that might not be necessarily innovation in the sense that we're thinking about it tech-wise, but I think it's certainly an audience that we need to pay attention to, and one that the pandemic has shown a pretty bright light on in terms of not being able to access education the way that we would have expected. That's where at least I hope to see greater innovation in the future for ed tech and education overall.
Definitely. Thank you for this answer. I think it kind of reminds me of one of the famous quote: education is not the learning of facts, but rather the training of the mind to think. I think it's from Einstein. So it's definitely very kind for you to say that. And let me turn to Shuo. So you are the general partner at IOVC, which has great relation with many founders. What's your take on this? Where do you see the future of education is going? And are there any exciting innovation going on in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so ed tech has always been an area where it has been tough, but I think when we have become more creative over the pandemic and kind of see changes accelerated, there has been a number of really exciting directions. For example, we backed a company earlier this year, actually at the beginning of this year, that has very quickly raised a subsequent next round, led by one of kind of the largest funds here in Silicon Valley. And what this startup does is actually enable any educator to start their own accredited university. So there's been a lot of plays out there that allow any individual to teach courses better online, but this is the first time where we've actually seen software enable someone to create their own accreditation program. And it's been really fascinating because a founder actually previously was a professor at Oxford. He sat on the board of Oxford for a number of years, and then being American, he moved back and basically started this platform. And it's been fascinating, not just because of the fact that it actually empowers essentially anyone who has relevant content, not limited to kind of historic or traditional types of educators, to be able to teach in a way that has credits, but also it allows us to rethink the role of companies when it comes to education, in that it used to be that we actually have tons of schools when you think about it, but when you think about the true brand name schools, I'm sure Linda would agree that during the pandemic, we've definitely seen this coalescence or kind of gravitation towards brand name universities, particularly more so than ever before. But there's only so few brand name universities. And if we want to provide access to quality education to more people than ever before, it's going to be difficult if we're limiting kind of the number of people who have access to that kind of quality education. And so we see companies actually stepping up to that in interesting ways. So this particular startup that I'm talking about now provides infrastructure to allow large companies like Nike and Amazon to offer Nike and Amazon branded accreditation programs, where Nike can teach courses about branding and brand management to people who might want to pursue a career in that. And then Amazon can provide an Amazon undergraduate degree for computer science. What an interesting world that we're moving into, where we're really rethinking what that world looks like. And I would say, I actually am about to give a talk on future of education at a nearby TEDx. And I was asked by a lot of folks on, if you had to kind of think about the future, what would you think are some of the most relevant technologies that are changing the way that we think about the future? I think definitely number one, AI, in terms of augmenting the work that we do. It can automate a lot of the work that we used to have to do that was very tedious, so that educators can better focus their time on the more human pieces of things, exactly addressing to what Linda was saying earlier. If we can be more efficient, then faculty can spend more time on the uniquely human pieces of education, which is building relationships, giving personalized attention, and doing all of that to facilitate students' learning. And then two, blockchain actually has been extremely fascinating in terms of realigning interests between different stakeholders in the ecosystem. So last year, we actually saw Berkeley auction off our first NFT of Nobel Prize enabled research. And basically, in addition to people being able to directly own this research, the auction of that also gave Berkeley more funding so that we can use that to conduct even more research. So I would say those are kind of the top two technologies that come to mind when we look forward into this world that is very quickly adapting. And I guess for anyone who's interested in the startup I mentioned, it's called Woolf, WOOLF, named after Virginia Woolf.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I want to lastly turn to Paolo. I know you and your team is already ahead of many others and also doing something, to transform the traditional university and to bring the program to the globe. What do you think on this? What innovations are you planning in the next few years?
So I think that we need to distinguish two different dimensions. Now, the first one is that through technology, what we have been able is to break down a lot of the barriers. No? So the first one is that academic institutions are not the only ones to provide content anymore, as Sue just mentioned. So we have academic institutions, super relevant, and I think that they still need to play a very important role in society. Then we do have the companies providing knowledge and accreditation, etc. And then we do have individuals, people themselves, that they are teaching and sharing knowledge across the globe like never before. So I think that that's something that we need to consider, no? And it's not a technology per se, but it's facilitated by technology. And then in my opinion, I think that we do have two very relevant technologies that they're hitting education like never before. Now, one is analytics. I think that through analytics, what we could do is we can customize the paths of the journeys of the students, which is very important because we are not the same, so we should not be treated the same. And I think that through analytics, what we can do is we can customize a lot for the individuals. What are they willing or they're expecting for their education process? And then another one that we are using a lot, which is tele-immersive rooms, in which we can see almost immediately, you know, Linda was mentioning the barcode technology, etc. There are a lot of technologies right now in which you can connect or engage through technology. Plus, in addition to that, what we can build is a lot of AR. So AR is something that is still an unknown territory, that if we use AR for educational purposes, I think, or I believe that we can bring up the capability of the faculty for sharing a lot of things, a lot of their knowledge, and bring up those experiences for the students.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you to all of you. I think the past 15 minutes is a multi-million-dollar business plan, and we host this event for free. So for those who are joining now, interested in the future of education, this is a great starting point. We talk about innovation in curriculum, content, online courses, using machine learning to give feedback. We talk about matching students with tutors. We talk about using AR, VR for the next generation of course materials. So, and many others. Right? So maybe you can go to Ms. Chen or some of our BCS sponsors for your angel investment. So the next part, we're moving to our very interesting Q&A session. So we have received lots of questions in the chat box. Our panelists will try answering them quickly within a minute or so that we can get into more questions. So I think the first question is, I think previously Rudy mentioned, I can turn the mic to you first. The question reads, would Coursera and Minerva replace the traditional four-year undergraduate education? If not completely, would it be at least capture some of the market?
I can answer.
Sure. So just to clarify, Minerva University does offer an accredited undergraduate degree. So it's actually a competitor for traditional universities. But I think the focus of the question is more on OPMs and edtech providers like Coursera and Udemy, Udacity, edX, Noodle, et cetera. Well, edX is now acquired by 2U. And I think the answer to that, and my hunch is that it will not replace the traditional university. But instead, when we think about what the market entails, I think even traditional universities are not capturing the entire market today. There are a lot of students and prospective students who want to be able to get some courses, some credit, and some education under their belt. And Coursera, Udemy, and others are filling that gap. They're providing the type of flexibility, access to high quality education, and high quality instructors or star instructors that they're currently locked out of right now. It's just the way that the industry was built. And so whether they're going to replace their traditional university, I don't think that's the case. I still think that there's an incredible demand for the type of amazing experiences that places like Berkeley offer. I mean, there are just so many things that are key to what entails an undergraduate experience on campus. But I do think that places like Coursera, 2U, et cetera, are providing a really great alternative, an alternative that is growing in quality and meeting some need for prospective learners that I do think will capture a market that has since been unsatisfied.
Lina, please go ahead.
I think that for a very long time, our students have been using Udacity. There are great certificates that teach, the nano engineering certificate that teaches data science, machine learning. And I don't think it's going to replace, but it's complementary to a degree. And so I think it will never replace it, but again, I think it's a great complement to getting an education. And professors within a 30-hour course of 45 cannot sometimes deliver all of the skill set and the knowledge that our students need. So going to Udacity, for instance, is necessary in a one-year master's degree program like ours. And that's how we prepare our students before they come to Berkeley. Very efficient, again, process or system, because then the professors know that the level of the students is such that they can then apply the material. We expect our students to know Python perfectly before they come to do the MFE program. Where else to do it? Yes, at some universities perhaps, but I think Udacity is a great, great field in here to a great certificate to use for us.
Can I just jump in and make one more point? Because Linda actually brings up a really good case of what complementary coursework looks like. But one thing I want to remind everyone is that Coursera, Udemy, Udacity don't create their own content. Universities do. And they put those onto the platforms, and places like Berkeley do that. And so in some cases, they ask their students to take those courses that are on other platforms. The real question here in terms of challenge is how a traditional university has been threatened by those platforms. So what are the types of things that they need to catch up on? So flexibility, for example, is one of those things. What lessons have been drawn from students who have wanted to take, the courses in it, on Udemy in addition to what they're doing? But most importantly, where might traditional universities lose prospective learners to places like Coursera, Udacity, Udemy, et cetera, who now have the option to take accredited degrees online, right? Where they could do it on campus if they wanted to, but where might they choose, and why might they choose to do it only through those platforms instead of applying to Berkeley directly, for example?
Wonderful.
If it's
Thank
okay to briefly add on to Linda and Rudy's points, because this is such an interesting topic. I absolutely agree with the importance of complementary education. And in fact, on Rudy's last point of where are we losing potential students to these alternative platforms? So the former CTO at Coinbase famously said that right now it's not just a great resignation, but that we are losing people because startups are picking talent off of Twitter more so than ever before, right? Instead of hiring for people who have a traditional 4-year undergraduate degree, as long as they're able to demonstrate their ability to build, companies are hiring that way. So I think it's also not just about thinking of education within kind of a traditional educational framework, but also what comes next. It doesn't necessarily mean that the purpose of education is only for preparing people to succeed in the workplace. There's many other valuable things that they would gain from a great educational experience. But also when we think about preparing students for that future role of transitioning into a working professional, what are kind of the right skill sets to bring in? And I think a lot of the times it's important for us to even think beyond a traditional undergraduate education process, because if students are falling into alternative education earlier on in their lives, they may not ever be on this path of applying for a 4-year undergraduate degree. For example, some of the really interesting guest lecturers that I've had the fortune of bringing into my class this semester include Elon Musk's co-founder at his school. So they, of course, started the school for SpaceX employees on campus originally to have an alternative source of education, but then they digitalized everything into the startup called Synthesis that's now providing digital education for very young kids through games that teach them problem-solving skills. And what's been really fascinating is that when he came in, he actually brought a number of his students who are like 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds, and we had them go into breakout rooms with all of my students to just play games together, have them interact. And when I was debriefing with my class afterwards, a lot of my students told me, the smartest person in the room was definitely that 8-year-old who had just been learning from very non-traditional sources where they don't think the way that, people used to think. So it's really, really interesting when we kind of expand our way of thinking in this space.
Yeah, wonderful. You actually answered one of the other questions that I saw in the chat box here. And I want to give a question to Paulo, kind of slightly connect with the previous question as well. What do you think are some qualities or skill set that a modern, kind of educator should have that an educator a decade ago may not have needed?
Well, I think the mindset, I don't know if that is a skill set, but the mindset, so we need to change, and that's the most important thing. Technology is available, so that's something that is already there. So if we need to set or define what should be the best value or virtue the faculty and the institutions, I think it's mindset, because right now the main stopper is not technology anymore. So I think that we need to reset a little bit is our systems, our mindsets, and how we are approaching education in general. Also traditional ways, we are saying, and Shu was just mentioning the non-traditional sources, etc. So I think that the university, they are doing this big exercise of incorporating a lot of new platforms, technologies, ways of interacting, faculties doing new things, etc. So I think that with a different mindset or looking things or to things in a different way, that will be the most valuable lesson that we could incorporate to the education space or sector in the very short term. And from there, we can build all the rest of things. So I think that mindset is the key element for bringing up or changing what we have done so far.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And for the sake of time, I think we'll have one last question that we have pre-collected from a lot of the audience. So thank you so much for all the audience who share your thoughts and raise your question in the chat box. We really appreciate that. Our last question is actually to each and every panelist. It's a question that has been asked by many times. It's just, what is the suggestion for me, right? So, and we hope this question can bring more value to all the audience in front of this live stream and to your future education endeavors. So I hope our panelists can give some recommendations from your expertise to the international student community. I'll give 2 minutes for our panelists to think about it. And in the meantime, we have Dr. Hennessy again, sharing his thoughts on the importance of having a global perspective.
When I retired as president, I started a new program we have at Stanford called the Knight Hennessy Scholars. The goal of the Knight Hennessy Scholars is to bring in graduate students from around the world, fund them for their graduate education, and help them develop as future world leaders. And we emphasize the global world leader aspect of this. For example, in the most recent class, the 2021 class, more than 40% of our scholars have a passport from outside the United States. And the reason that we believe this global perspective is so critical is that the toughest problems we face around the world are not limited to a single society or environment, but often overlap. Issues of climate change, for example, peace and security, development in a global sense. These are problems which span borders. And it's one of the reasons we believe that we want to form an international cohort of scholars coming together from around the world to learn, not only learn their graduate material, learn leadership skills, but also be in a multicultural, multidisciplinary environment where they can grow as people, understand some of the challenges that people face around the world, and have a set of relationships in a community of scholars that spans the globe. And I'm very hopeful that we will be able to produce people who will help in the years ahead, lead us to a better world.
Well, this is a very kind note from Dr. Hennessy. We hope that more talents around the globe have resources to access to the quality education. So let's go back to our panelists. What messages do you have to potential applicants, study abroad participants, online program learners, and what do you say to those who do not actually have the equitable quality education resources? Should we start with Linda again?
So my advice to any international student, to any student, is to develop your communication skills and leadership skills. Know who you are, what you're able to do. Make sure that you understand what are the things that happen in the world by reading about blockchain, for instance, and all the changes, if you keep abreast of all the changes. But I would say try to network as much as you can with not just your professors, but fellow students. And also perhaps if you know what you want to do later, network and through LinkedIn, through reading and contacting people, asking questions. It is very, very important to build who you are and what you are before you, as you learn and acquire basically knowledge and follow your educational path. That's what my advice would be to any international student.
Thank you. Shall we turn the mic to Shuo, please?
Perfect. So I love Linda's advice. And to add on to what she was saying, I would say when you're looking to build your network, think about what unique value you might be able to add. I think a lot of the times I have students that reach out to me. Of course, in class, I'm more than happy to be helpful. And even outside of a class, I always try to be as helpful as possible. But I think it's important as international students to think about willingness to just get involved with things hands-on. Some of the best interns I've ever had started off as just unpaid interns. And they said, you know what, I will do anything that you want me to do as long as I can get involved. And very quickly, that specific student I had in mind, she actually ended up taking over all of our marketing initiatives and then ran that for a good number of years. And of course, now she's head of product at one of the largest unicorns in the Bay Area. And so I think it's really about how you think about taking ownership and being very proactive in terms of networking with people and then offering to add value. Do anything to get involved. I'm sure that person's time that you're spending time with, just that time and that relationship building will more than pay off itself when you think about the long run.
Thank you so much, Shuo. We'll next turn the mic to Rudy and Paolo. Rudy?
Sure, I will be brief. I would encourage everyone to consider that they have alternatives and they have options that are worth exploring. So I know it's really easy to kind of get constrained within, I have to do this in my study abroad, I have to do this within the traditional higher education system, but there are now more opportunities to do and gain experience than ever before. And so please consider everything that's in front of you and what it might lead you to in the future, even if it's not completely aligned to what you think that you might do.
Please.
I will add. Yes, I will add two things. Now, first of all, is that this is the first time that you can study almost everywhere in any language. For the first time in our history, we broke down the language barrier. So for international students, that's very important. So not everything needs to be only in English. It's English plus a set of languages, which is very important. And then my advice would be that lifelong learning and keep learning, things are changing too fast and we are getting sometimes obsolete in terms of knowledge. So my advice would be, please, lifelong learning, keep up to speed. Things are changing so rapidly that we need to continue learning. And it's not like the traditional, we go to the university, potentially a master's degree, etc. Right now it's going to be a 30 years continuing education process. So, I mean, it's something that you need to incorporate to your DNA and move on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. We hope this panel has brought some new thinking for the future. So we have talked about the challenges during the pandemic, the latest education technology and innovation, and we have shared the growing trend and brainstormed some of the opportunities in the future of education. And our amazing panelists also share their personal recommendations to you. We hope one day we could further empower education with some of more advanced technologies and bring the equitable quality education to everyone. So I'd like to thank again to Dr. Hennessy for sending the videos, and of course to all the amazing panelists we have here, Ms. Shuo Chen, Dr. Linda Chrisman, Mr. Paulo Livas, and Mr. Rudy Rubio. Thank you so much for being here. So ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our education panel. Thank you for your kind attention, and we hope to enjoy the rest of our event.
Thank you so much, everyone, and especially to our wonderful moderator.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.